Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be talking about something that's pretty crucial.
Okay.
It's about how water sanitation and hygiene projects are financed,
Yeah.
or WASH, as it's often called for short.
Yeah.
We're going to be focusing specifically on Ethiopia, and we're looking at a report that came out in 2025
Okay.
by Abdulkadir, who is a really prominent advocate in the WASH sector. And this is a deep dive that I think has some pretty fascinating implications for not just global development, but also for social change more broadly.
Yeah, this report, it kind of delves into this concept that's almost counterintuitive.
Okay.
You would think that by making things more affordable, you'd be increasing access.
Right.
But Abdulkadir actually argues that the decades of subsidies that we've seen for WASH projects
Yeah.
have actually potentially hindered the development of a market
Wow.
that can be self-sustaining and really function on its own.
So that's a fascinating paradox. Why would making something cheaper actually make it harder to get over time? What's the logic behind that?
Well, it has to do with how subsidies can sometimes distort a market.
Okay.
So think about it this way.
Okay.
If people get used to receiving something for free or for very, very cheap, they're probably going to be less likely to pay full price for it later down the road.
Right.
And this can make it difficult for businesses to actually, make a profit and stay afloat.
I see. So it's almost like you're creating this dependency.
Yeah.
And then when that dependency can no longer be supported, it all falls apart.
Right.
Do you have like a real world example that might make this a little bit easier to grasp?
Sure. So let's imagine
Okay.
that your daily coffee was suddenly subsidized by the government.
Okay.
It was practically free.
Yeah.
And then after a few years, let's say the subsidies are lifted.
Okay.
Would you and all the other coffee drinkers out there be willing to start paying that full price again?
Probably not.
And what would that mean for all the coffee shops
Right.
that were relying on those sales?
Yeah. I see your point. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And this report isn't just theoretical, is it?
Oh, no, not at all.
Abdulkadir is really trying to highlight the human impact of this.
Yeah,
on
absolutely.
Slightly ground.
They paint a very real picture of the challenges that people are facing in Ethiopia, and particularly those who are living in rural communities.
Yeah.
So imagine a family, struggling with limited income, maybe seasonal work. They're having to make these tough choices about how they spend their money.
Yeah.
And sanitation may not be the top priority.
Especially if they're used to getting it cheaply or for free.
Exactly.
They may not see the value in paying full price, even if it's for their own good.
Exactly. And it ends up creating this catch-22
Oh, wow.
for the entrepreneurs who are actually trying to provide these sanitation solutions.
Yeah.
You've got low profits,
Right.
limited access to affordable capital. It's an unpredictable market.
It's a very risky business venture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they might want to improve sanitation, but they can't sustain a business.
Exactly.
Right. So it's not just about the money. It's about building a system that works for everybody.
Absolutely.
And the report highlights a lot of other sort of systemic issues too, right?
Yeah, it does. Things like poorly developed supply chains.
Okay.
Or a lack of awareness about different sanitation options. These are all major obstacles as well.
It sounds like a really complicated web of challenges. So if subsidies are part of the problem, what does the report suggest as some potential solutions? So if we're trying to move away from this dependence on subsidies,
Right.
what's the alternative?
Well, the report really advocates for this shift toward more market-based approach.
Okay, so what does that actually look like? How do we create a market-based system?
Well, one of the key things that Abdulkadir emphasizes is the need to really improve access to credit, both for the consumers.
Who want to invest in sanitation solutions, but also for the entrepreneurs who are trying to build their businesses.
That makes sense because if people can't afford to buy these products and services,
Right.
even if they see the value, the market's not going to grow.
Exactly. And the report actually points out that there's a real lack of policy support for sanitation loans, especially compared to things like agriculture or energy.
So it sounds like we need to make it easier for people to invest in sanitation.
Yeah.
What else does the report suggest?
Well, it also it dives into the need for stronger supply chains.
Okay.
Because you can't have a thriving market if the products themselves are difficult to get or to transport.
Right.
And then there's this whole issue of awareness.
Yeah.
People need to understand what their options are,
Absolutely.
what the benefits of different sanitation solutions might be.
I feel like education and awareness campaigns could be really powerful in driving demand and changing perceptions.
Oh, absolutely.
So, when we talk about moving towards this market-based approach, does the report address any potential downsides?
Yeah, that's a crucial point. Abdul-Qadir does acknowledge that there's a risk of leaving certain vulnerable populations behind.
Right.
So they really emphasize the need to have safeguards in place.
Okay.
Targeted interventions to make sure everyone has access to at least basic sanitation services, regardless of their financial situation.
So it's not about abandoning the idea of helping people?
No.
It's about finding a smarter way to do it.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between empowering people to make their own choices and providing that support where it's most needed.
So we've talked about the challenges. We've talked about the need for this market-based approach. Does Abdul-Qadir give any specific recommendations
They do.
for how to actually implement these changes?
Yeah, one of the most, I think, compelling ideas in the report is this idea of integrating WWASH loans into the portfolios of existing financial institutions.
Interesting.
So things like microfinance institutions and commercial banks.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit? How would that work in practice?
Well, imagine if applying for a sanitation loan was as straightforward as applying for a car loan.
I like that analogy. Makes it seem a lot less intimidating.
Right. And the impact could be enormous.
Yeah.
I mean, in Ethiopia alone, there are over 40 microfinance institutions and 18 commercial banks.
Wow.
So if even a fraction of those started offering these loans,
it
could really drastically change things.
We would also send a really strong message that sanitation is a priority and a worthy investment.
Absolutely.
But do you think those institutions would be willing to take on that risk?
Well, that's where I think the need for policy support comes back into play.
Okay.
So, governments and development agencies can play a role in de-risking these loans, maybe through guarantees or subsidies, targeted specifically at those institutions.
So it's about creating a supportive ecosystem where everybody's working together towards the same goal.
And what about the role of consumers in all of this? Well, consumer demand is ultimately what drives market growth.
Right.
So the more people are demanding these sanitation products and services, the more businesses are going to be motivated to provide them.
So even small actions like choosing to buy from a company that prioritizes sanitation can make a difference.
Absolutely. And beyond just those individual choices, there's also the power of advocacy.
Right.
Consumers can raise their voices. They can demand better sanitation infrastructure. They can push for policies that support this market.
It sounds like this report really challenges us to think differently.
It does.
About how we approach WASH financing. It's not just about charity. It's about building a system where everybody benefits.
I think that's a great way to put it.
It really feels like this report kind of reframes the whole conversation around WASH.
Yeah.
It's not just about providing toilets. It's about empowering people and creating a system that can really work for the long haul.
Yeah, and what I think is particularly interesting is that it really encourages us to think beyond those traditional approaches.
Okay.
It's not just about governments and NGOs. It's about engaging the private sector, financial institutions, even individual consumers in finding solutions.
That's a powerful concept. But I'm curious, as we move in this direction, are there any risks or downsides?
That's a good question. I think one concern could be that, by focusing so much on market forces, we might end up creating inequalities in access.
Okay.
So we need to be really careful to make sure that sanitation solutions are affordable and accessible to everyone.
Not just those who can afford it.
Exactly.
So how do we balance that?
Well, I think that's where the role of government and regulatory bodies becomes really important.
Okay.
They need to establish those clear standards, maybe provide incentives for serving those marginalized communities, and potentially offer some targeted subsidies for those who need them most.
So it's not an either or.
Right.
It's about finding that sweet spot.
Exactly.
This has been a really fascinating conversation. I feel like I learned a lot. As we wrap up, what would you say is the one key takeaway?
I think for me, the biggest takeaway is that we need to really shift our mindset around WASH.
Okay.
It's not just a charity issue. It's a development issue.
Yeah.
It's an economic issue. It's a human rights issue.
Yeah.
And finding those sustainable solutions really requires a multifaceted approach. We need everybody involved.
It's a call to action, then.
It is.
We can all do our part
Absolutely.
to create a world where everybody has access to sanitation.
Whether it's through our consumer choices,
Mm-hmm.
our advocacy, or even our investments,
Yeah.
we can all contribute.
Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in to another deep dive. We'll catch you next time.